Epilepsy is the fourth most common neurological problem in the world. 1 in 26 people will develop epilepsy at some time in their life. It can affect anyone at any age at any time. It just so happens that my father is among the estimated 2.2 million people living with epilepsy. My father was first diagnosed with epilepsy at the age of 13. He took his first seizure while fishing with a friend at a wharf in New Brunswick. Doctors believe that it was my dad's seizure that caused him to fall off of the wharf into the water. He was pronounced dead for more than 10 minutes until someone was finally able to rescue him and resuscitate him back to life. It is a true miracle that he's still with us today.
One minute he looked over, I was fishing, the next minute he looked over and I was in the water doing dead man's float. They managed to take a boat, a little boat, 14-foot boat, and they got to me. By the time they got there, they figured I was dead and drowned. To this day, they can't figure out because I was out more than 10 minutes. So they can't figure out why I'm still alive.
When diagnosed with a chronic illness, it can be very difficult for the individual to understand and really grasp the significance of their new condition. When my father was first diagnosed at the age of 13, he was very confused. When the doctor first gave my father the diagnosis, the word epilepsy meant nothing to him. It wasn't until he researched his new condition on his own was he then able to fully understand what this condition was and how it was going to impact his life. Initially, fear was the main emotion that overtook my father. All of the unknowns weighed heavily upon him for quite some time. Will I be able to get my driver's license? When is going to be the next time I hurt myself when taking a seizure?
Well, I remember when Dad brought me to the hospital after taking my first seizure, and a Dr. David Silverberg was my neurologist at the time, and informed us that I had epilepsy. At the time, to me, it was just a word. When you're young, you believe that you're invincible. But epilepsy, that train of thought kind of left me that day. I think once I left the hospital, is that your maturity level kind of increases, because now what you do have, if you do not take care of yourself, one mistake can cost you your life.
It was tough for my father growing up with epilepsy because from the age of 13 to his early 20s, he was continuously experiencing uncontrolled seizures, sometimes 2 to 3 a week. This forced my father to have to live in a controlled environment because if he took a seizure, he was always at risk for hurting himself. There were several times that he actually injured himself while taking a seizure.
I have fallen where I've had to have stitches. I have fallen where I've knocked my head and actually had a concussion.
Luckily, when my father turned 21, his luck changed. He was fortunate enough to be able to attend the Montreal Neurological Center, which was and still is the largest specialized neuroscience research and clinical center in Canada and one of the largest in the world. At the Montreal Neurological Center, they were able to control my father's seizures by adjusting his medication after finally discovering what type of epilepsy he had. While at this center, my father was also able to get a better understanding of his illness. Epilepsy is a chronic disease that can greatly influence a person's life. It is characterized by unpredictable, reoccurring seizures. A seizure is caused by the sudden discharge of cerebral neurons in the brain. My father explains that a seizure is the result of all of the synapses in your brain all going off at once. He describes epilepsy as sort of having a faulty spark plug in your brain. There are several different types of seizures that exist. Some where you experience a change in consciousness, and others where you lose complete consciousness. The type of seizures my father experiences are called grand mal or tonic-clonic seizures, which are unfortunately the worst ones to have. Triggers and warning signs of epilepsy have been recognized for quite some time. It has been researched that flashing lights, stress, sleep deprivation and tiredness, and missed medication can all trigger the onset of a seizure. For my father, he is guaranteed to take a seizure if he forgets to take his medication at night. The only other thing that can trigger a seizure in my father is if he is waking up too fast in the morning. This is because with the type of epilepsy he has, he will only take a seizure within 15 to 20 minutes of waking up, which is when the synapses in his brain are also waking up as well. Many individuals experience symptoms before a seizure. Symptoms can include any awareness, sensory, emotional, or thought changes, such as an aura, a déjà vu, certain smells, sounds, and taste, strange or scary feelings, dizziness, nausea, numbness and tingling in part of the body. On the other hand, some individuals like my father experience no symptoms whatsoever before a seizure, and therefore have no warning that one is going to occur. When my father takes a seizure, like most people with epilepsy, they don't recall what happens during their seizure or what it looks like. This is when the family can give the best description as to what happens when their loved one takes a seizure.
One of the things that an epileptic doesn't see, especially when you're taking a grand mile, is what the other people watching you actually experience. There is only one time that I recall that my daughters had actually seen me take a seizure. And at that time, they were 8 and 9. And it bothered me, the effects that it had on me, since it was something that they had never seen their father take.
To this day, I can still remember all of the details of when my father took his first seizure in front of my sister and I. At that time, that experience was very traumatic for me. I can remember playing with my toys in my bedroom with my sister when out of nowhere we heard a big bang. We both knew that right then and there that something was wrong. As a scaredy cat I hid in the closet as my older sister went to go see what was the matter. After hearing my sister scream, I immediately ran out to the kitchen to see my father convulsing on the floor. His eyes were rolled back as he was making unrecognizable groaning sounds. My sister immediately ran to go get help and left me alone with my father. I knew that I had to right away put him on his side to prevent him from biting his tongue, but I had no success. Every time I kept putting my father on his side, he kept pushing and hitting me away. While I tried to keep my father down on the ground, he kept continuously getting up and knocking things over and just repeatedly kept falling down and taking things down with him. I knew at this point that I had to take a step back to protect myself. While watching all of this unfold, I can still clearly remember that the man in front of me was no longer the father that I had recognized. All of the things that I knew my father for, like his facial expressions, the way he walked and talked, and the way he looked at me, was all completely gone. It was like a stranger had taken over his body, and that person inside of him no longer had any control. Thankfully, this was the only seizure I witnessed my father take because his epilepsy is controlled with medication. However, many individuals aren't as fortunate as my father, and their epilepsy cannot be controlled with medication. These individuals are forced to live a completely different life than my father, a life that revolves around fear, and a life that is controlled by seizures. One of the questions that is often asked to my father is what has caused his epilepsy. Although epilepsy may be the result of an infection or brain injury, for roughly 60% of people with epilepsy, no specific cause is known. However, my father is one of the special cases where it's believed that his epilepsy was inherited by his mother.
When they tested my mother, because she was also an epileptic, and she had only taken one seizure in all of her life. But again, once an epileptic, always an epileptic. So they took her EEG and my EEG, and what was really unusual, if they put them up side by side, the similarities between the two of them were extremely bizarre. And they believe, based on what they seen from the EEG, that my condition was actually hereditary.
After my father's stay at the Montreal Neurological Center, his life was forever changed. Up until that point, doctors in New Brunswick were just trying to medicate his seizures instead of determining the cause and effect. This was very frustrating on my father and his parents. At one point, he was actually on 21 different types of medication at once, and he was still having seizures. Most of these drugs he was on also had terrible side effects, such as extreme tiredness and decreased concentration levels. One of the main reasons why my father had to visit the Montreal Neurological Center was because the New Brunswick healthcare system at that time did not have any epilepsy specialists, when Montreal did. At this center, they were finally able to monitor my father while he took a seizure, in order to determine the cause of them so that they could choose the most appropriate form of medication for him. The Montreal Neurological Center also opened up my father's eyes to what others see during a seizure. It gave him a better perspective to what his parents and children went through when they had to witness him take a seizure. When it comes to the New Brunswick healthcare system, one of the only problems my father has with it is when it comes to his driver's license. Since specialists in Montreal have controlled his epilepsy with a certain medication, he has only had a couple of seizures. However, one of these seizures almost costed him his livelihood. After this particular seizure, 911 was called and he was brought to the Moncton Hospital. While at the hospital, the doctor suspended my dad's driver's license without knowing his full medical history. Because my father is a salesman, his job depends on having the ability to drive. After finally getting the specialist in Montreal to confirm that his epilepsy is controlled, his driver's license was given back to him. Even though my dad was given back his license, this experience was nevertheless still very frustrating and stressful for him. Even though my father's epilepsy has been controlled for almost 30 years, he still experiences some challenges with this illness. First of all, my father still needs to be very careful when waking up in the morning because he still has a slight risk of taking a seizure. Therefore, my father needs to ensure that he wakes up slowly each and every day and just does not jump out of bed. Because of my father's epilepsy, he still isn't able to do some activities alone, just as a precaution, such as hunting, fishing, or taking a bath. Another challenge that my father experiences due to epilepsy is achieving rapid eye movement sleep. Because of my father's particular form of epilepsy, he is unable to go into REM sleep. This allows him to function only off of 3 to 4 hours of sleep. He believes that another bonus to this challenge is that his subconscious is always awake 24/7, 7 days a week. Since my father has been diagnosed with epilepsy, he has been forced to become more mindful in his everyday routine. always remembering that he could potentially take a seizure. Although his epilepsy is now regulated, we have to remember that it wasn't before. During this time period, my father's parents had to take on more responsibility in ensuring my father was safe if he took a seizure. This made my father's parents do more activities with him so that he wasn't alone. His parents also had to witness him experience a large number of seizures before they were controlled. This was very difficult on my grandparents because they worried all the time about my dad's safety and continuously felt hopeless when he would take a seizure in front of them because there wasn't much that they could do. Growing up with my father having epilepsy didn't have much of an impact on my sister and I because it was regulated. However, at a very young age, we both were taught what epilepsy was and what to do if our father ever took a seizure with us. I feel that this made us feel more comfortable with the thought of him taking a seizure, since we felt prepared and equipped to deal with it. Having this education made this illness feel less terrifying at a young age and eliminated any stigma we might have developed towards this condition.
So far, everything's been great, and I just have to be very cautious that I do have the condition, because as I said, once an epileptic, you're always an epileptic.
When my father was asked the question, if you could say one thing to an individual who was just diagnosed with epilepsy, what would you tell them? My father responded,
There's some illnesses that are a lot worse. There's some illnesses that do not allow you to walk around, do things. The only thing with epilepsy that you have to be aware of is now they have new medications, they have new ways to operate. So it's not a closed shut that you have to live with it the rest of your life. So at the end of the day, it's not something I want. It's something that I have, and it's something that I have to live with.